This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today we spend the hour remembering the renowned actor, musician, composer, and activist Theodore Bikel. He died Tuesday at the age of 91. Bikel was known for creating the role of Baron von Trapp in The Sound of Music on Broadway, and for the role of Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, which he played more than 2,000 times. One of his earliest film roles came alongside Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn in The African Queen, and he was nominated for an Academy Award for his performance in The Defiant Ones. Theodore Bikel was also a beloved folk singer who co-founded the Newport Folk Festival with Pete Seeger and could accompany himself on guitar, mandolin, balalaika, and harmonica. He made more than 20 albums, many of them in Hebrew and Yiddish. But it may surprise you to learn that Theodore Bikel, a man so closely identified with Israel and with Jewish life, was also an outspoken critic of Israeli policy, especially a pending measure known as the Prar Plan, which would forcibly relocate some 40,000 Bedouins from their ancestral lands. Just last week, Israel's agriculture minister, Uri Ariel, withdrew a request that the cabinet discuss continuing the legislation pending more input from Bedouin leaders. In May, Israeli Arabs protested a 2-to-1 Supreme Court decision to allow the destruction of an unrecognized Bedouin village to make way for a Jewish town, ruling its Bedouin residents had no legal rights to it. Well, in late 2013, Bikel wrote an editorial in the Forward headlined, "Israel must work with Bedouin to develop Negev for all forced removals, and hostility to ancient people must end." He also produced a widely watched video for Rabbis for Human Rights that opens with the title "Fiddler with No Roof" and his own introduction.
My name is Theodore Bikel, and I want to ask you to help prevent a terrible moral tragedy. I spent much of my life playing Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. I see a parallel with what is happening today. 40,000 Bedouins in the Negev desert are being told to get out of their homes. Remember the scene in Fiddler on the Roof when the Russians arrive and tell them they have 3 days to get out. Tevye says, "Why should I get out?" He said, "Not just you, all of you." He said, "Why? Why should we leave?" "I don't know why. I have an order here." He said, "Piece of paper and get the out. What if we refuse to leave?" We know the consequences of refusal.
Yes, that is actor, singer, activist Theodore Bikel, famous for playing, among other characters, Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. Theodore Bikel died on Tuesday at the age of 91. I interviewed him last year, and today we spend the hour featuring our conversation. I began by asking Theodore Bikel why this issue of Bedouin displacement was so important to him.
There is a human equation here, and it has to do with the basic humanity of human beings who are nominally free to pursue whatever it is that their fate tells them to do. People who lived on the land for centuries, long before there was even a state of Israel, who all of a sudden are being told to get out, to be relocated, an agrarian society that is forced into sometimes urban ghettos. It seems less than just. The point is that these are not simple questions, and complicated questions very often ask for complicated answers. But one thing that is absolutely clear in my mind is that human beings cannot be treated like cattle. Human beings must be given the dignity and the respect that all human beings deserve, especially by a people who themselves, Jews, have experienced such deprivation in the past. So when I say that the very people who were told to get out of Anatevka in the fictional village of Fiddler on the Roof, the descendants of those very people are now telling others, strangers in their midst, that they must get out of their homes, seems fundamentally wrong. And a wrong cannot be allowed to stand. Now, I'm not a naive person, I know, and I said this before, this is a complicated question, and the Bedouin themselves don't always agree among themselves about what the solution is. I also know that the commissions that have been in place never consulted them, never had them as part of the solution, and that is wrong also. You cannot tell people to get out of their homes without their having a say in it. There was a commission headed by former Justice Goldberg of the Supreme Court of Israel that had recommendation powers but no implementation powers. Later there was another commission by Prower and Benny Begin, the son of Prime Minister Begin, and that came to naught because people on the right objected to the plan, saying that it gave away too much, and people on the left objected, saying that it gave too little. Again, it's not a simple question, but what is simple to me is the fact that we're talking here about human beings, citizens of a state, whether or not you want it, whether or not it is true, but the basic law of Israel speaks of all its inhabitants, regardless of their provenance, regardless of their faith, regardless of the color of their skin. And that we as Americans must understand.
Many might be surprised to hear this coming from your voice, a voice that is familiar to so many as Tevye and also just as a remarkable singer and musician. Theodore Bikel, named for Theodore Herzl, the founder of Zionism. What kind of response have you gotten from all sectors of the Jewish community?
Well, the right wing of the Jewish community has never been particularly in my corner. The right portion of the of the political spectrum, and I do not see eye to eye, never have. I am, for want of a better definition, I am a liberal. I'm proud of it. I grew up in a home. My father was a socialist and a Zionist. I cling to both. I am a Zionist. I do not believe in boycotting the state of Israel. I do believe in a boycott that is targeted. In other words, I will not buy produce from the territories, because the territories are the single obstacle to peace that I can see on the map of Israel. But I will not side with those who want to boycott all of Israeli institutions, all of Israeli economic and academic institutions. I do not side with them, and I believe that it is wrong to call for a boycott of the Habima Theater, for example, as was recently done by Emma Thompson. You have to be careful whom you attack and whom you defend.
Habima Theater being one that you actually helped to found many decades ago in Tel Aviv.
Yes, indeed. And I was in favor of those actors who said they will not perform in the territories, in the town of Ariel, for example, which is part of the disputed territory of the occupied territory of Israel. I'm in favor of their refusal to appear, and I recall what Pablo Casal said. My cello, he said, is my weapon. I decide where I play, what I play, and before whom I play. So we make a statement by our presence and by our absence.
Theodore Bikel, talk about where you were born and how you came to live in Israel as a child.
I was born in Vienna, Austria. A lovely place, a place that allowed me to develop as a human being, to love theater, literature, to love music, and allowed me to develop as a Jew. I was 13 years old when the Nazis marched in, and overnight I became, from a human being of equal rights, an object of derision and of hatred and of persecution, and I became ultimately a refugee. which in one way or another I remained all my life. I had to flee. I had to flee a place that I used to call home, and I have not returned to that place until fairly recently. I returned to it with honors, and they've asked me to observe the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht in a very solemn, at a solemn occasion in the Parliament of Austria. But all these years, I smarted under the notion that a human being was told to get out. And that was me. Not only to get out, but to leave behind everything that was precious to him, especially the books.
The books of Shalom Aleichem, you point out in the video.
Yes, yes. And those were our friends. They were not just books. They were friends. They were dear to us. They were our relatives. We grew up with them. These were our songs. This was our background. This harked back to the place that I came from, the place that I never lived in, except in my memories and in my songs and in the language that I still cultivate to this day, Yiddish.
So you were forced to leave Austria when Germany occupied during the Anschluss. You left with your parents.
That is correct.
How
yes.
did you get to Palestine?
The British gave out some very limited number of entry permits into Palestine. They called them certificates. And frankly, they didn't know what to do with them. So they turned them over to the Jewish community in Austria. And in turn, these visas were given to people who had seniority in the Zionist movement. And my father was one of them. He had been a labor Zionist all his life. And we were lucky enough to be able to receive one of those coveted entry permits that covered only my father, my mother, and me. And we could take one suitcase each and flee. My grandmother had to stay behind. And it was she who actually rescued all our stuff, all our books. She sat in the anteroom of a warehouse that was lorded over by a Nazi Gauleiter, and she cried from morning till night. Finally, this big man said, "Get this old woman out of my sight. I'm going to sign off on anything she wants. Just get her out of here." And he did, and she actually shipped our stuff from Nazi Germany to Palestine.
So how long did you live in Palestine? You moved there at the age of
14. I was 14 years old when I got there. I left there when I was 22. I lived there for 8 years. When I left, there wasn't even a state yet. It was still called Palestine at the time. And I went to England to study at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. And I stayed in England for 8 years, and finally ended up in New York in 1954. And I've been an American ever since.
Actor, singer, activist Theodore Bikel, famous for playing, among other characters, Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. He died Tuesday at the age of 91. We're spending the hour with him from an interview I did from January 2014.